Just one more night, and I'll forget it ever happened, the billionaire said, but never planned on ending it. Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Dr. Tom's Love Tales, your home to relax and enjoy the most touching love stories that heal hearts and inspire souls. Before we begin this emotional journey together, kindly let us know which part of the world you're watching from in the comments below. I'm your host, Dr. Tom, and now, my family, let me cover you in a prayer soft as a whisper, warm as sunlight, and filled with all my love for you. May your heart feel lighter today than it did yesterday. May peace wrap around you like a gentle blanket, and may every corner of your soul be touched by quiet joy. I pray that the things you've been carrying, in silence and in strength, start to heal in the most unexpected, beautiful ways. As you step out, may you be met with kindness, comfort, and the kind of love that doesn't ask questions, it just stays. You are precious, you are whole, you are endlessly loved. Amen. Now, my sweet family, this story is deeply special to me. Every line was written with care, with emotion, and with you in mind. So, tell me softly, did you enjoy our last story together? If you felt it, let me know below. If not, still let me know. I'll always listen because your voice matters here. Also, please like and share, because someone out there needs to feel this warmth we've built as family, full of loyalty, grace, and endless love. Let's begin with all my heart, as always. The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Metropolitan Art Gallery like nature's own percussion symphony, each drop creating rivers that distorted the view of Boston's historic Back Bay district. Inside the quiet sanctuary of carefully preserved culture, Nicole Murphy moved with the delicate precision of someone who understood that beauty was fragile, that one careless moment could destroy centuries of human expression. At 25, Nicole had learned to survive on passion and ramen noodles, her bank account as thin as the canvas she so lovingly restored. Her hands trembled slightly not from the cold that seeped through the old building's bones, but from exhaustion that came from pouring every ounce of herself into work that most people considered worthless. She adjusted the lighting on a Renaissance painting depicting a mother cradling her child, the golden hues warming under the carefully positioned bulbs. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, preserving other people's expressions of love and family, while her own heart remained locked away like the most precious artifacts in the gallery's vault. Her father had taught her that lesson when she was 12 years old, the day he walked out of their small apartment in Southie without a backward glance. Love, she had learned, meant risking everything you held dear, and Nicole had already lost enough. The gallery was her sanctuary, filled with works that others deemed too damaged, too obscure, or too unfashionable for the prestigious museums downtown. But Nicole saw something different in these forgotten pieces. She saw stories that deserved to be told, artists whose voices had been silenced by time and circumstance. In many ways, she recognized herself in these abandoned works, valuable but overlooked, beautiful but broken. Meanwhile, across the city, 47 floors above the bustling financial district, Damian Wesley stood before floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Boston Harbor. But he wasn't seeing the water or the city lights beginning to twinkle in the evening dusk. Instead, he stared at his own reflection, and for a moment, the successful billionaire real estate mogul disappeared, replaced by the scared 10-year-old boy whose father had died leaving nothing but crushing debt and overwhelming shame. At 32, Damian had built an empire from that pain, transforming his childhood poverty into a fortune that most people could only dream of. His penthouse was a testament to his success, sleek, modern, expensive. Every piece of furniture, every work of art, every carefully chosen detail screamed wealth and power. But success, he had discovered, felt remarkably hollow when every relationship in his life was poisoned by people who saw dollar signs instead of the man desperately searching for something real. The phone calls came constantly: business associates, social climbers, women who flattered him with practiced smiles while calculating the value of his watch. They all wanted something from him, and he had learned to give them exactly what they expected. The cold, calculating businessman who treated everything and everyone as potential acquisitions. It was easier than revealing the truth that beneath all the money and power, he was still that frightened child who just wanted someone to see him as worthy of love. Damian's reflection showed a man who had everything and nothing simultaneously. His empire sprawled across 3 states. His name appeared on buildings and in financial magazines. His bank accounts held more money than he could spend in several lifetimes. Yet he couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at him with genuine interest rather than calculated assessment. He couldn't recall the last conversation that hadn't somehow centered around business, money, or what he could do for someone else. The charity auction at the prestigious Beacon Hill auction house wasn't supposed to change anything. Damian had attended not out of any philanthropic impulse, but to spite Jonathan Crawford, a business rival, who had been courting several investors that Damian also wanted. Crawford would be there, surrounded by Boston's elite, playing the role of the generous benefactor. Damian's presence would remind everyone that there were bigger fish in the pond. The auction house itself was everything. Boston, old money represented, mahogany, paneling, crystal chandeliers, the kind of understated elegance that whispered rather than shouted its wealth. Damian moved through the crowd with practiced ease, exchanging pleasantries that meant nothing, shaking hands with people whose names he would forget within hours. He was going through the motions of his public persona when she appeared. Nicole stood before a painting of 2 lovers, separated by war, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd with an intensity that made even the most jaded socialites pause their conversations. She wasn't dressed like the other women in the room, no designer gown or flashy jewelry. Instead, she wore a simple black dress that looked like it had come from a department store. Her only adornment, a pair of small pearl earrings that had probably belonged to her grandmother. But when she spoke about the painting, something magical happened. Her voice transformed the room, making everyone lean forward to catch her words. "True love isn't about perfect moments," she said, her eyes fixed on the painted figures with an intensity that suggested she was speaking from personal experience. "It's about choosing each other when everything falls apart, when the world tries to tear you in different directions, when staying together requires more courage than walking away." Something in her words pierced through the carefully constructed walls that Damian had built around his heart. For the first time in years, he found himself genuinely interested in another person, not for what they could do for him, but for who they were beneath the surface. There was a vulnerability in her voice, a depth of feeling that spoke to the lonely places in his own soul. When the auction ended and the crowd began to disperse, Damian found himself walking toward her before he had consciously decided to move. Nicole was carefully wrapping the painting that had failed to meet its reserve price, her movements gentle and protective. Up close, he could see the intelligence in her dark eyes, the way she handled the artwork with the reverence of someone who truly understood its value. "Excuse me," he said, his usual confidence faltering slightly. "I wanted to tell you how much I enjoyed your presentation." Nicole looked up, and he saw her defenses activate instantly, like shutters slamming shut over windows. She had clearly dealt with wealthy collectors before, and her experience hadn't been positive. "Let me guess," she said, her tone polite but distant. "You're looking for something impressive for your lobby? Something that will make the right statement to your clients?" Damian found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in months. Her directness was refreshing in a world where everyone usually told him exactly what they thought he wanted to hear. "Actually," he said, surprising himself with his honesty, "I was wondering if you'd have dinner with me." The transformation in her expression was immediate and complete. Where there had been professional courtesy, now there was ice. "I don't date collectors, Mr. Wesley," she said, and he realized she knew exactly who he was. They have a tendency to see everything as something to own, including people. Her words stung because they held more truth than he was comfortable acknowledging. How many relationships had he approached like business deals? How many times had he tried to solve problems with money rather than genuine connection? But something about her fierce independence, her refusal to be impressed by his wealth, only made him more determined to prove that he could be different. Damian didn't give up, but he surprised both Nicole and himself by not using his usual weapons of wealth and influence. Instead, he began showing up at small galleries, reading about obscure artists, learning the language of her world. He attended exhibitions at tiny venues that most people would never notice, gradually understanding the passion that drove her to preserve art that others had forgotten. It took 3 weeks before he worked up the courage to approach her again. This time, he found her at a gallery in Jamaica Plain, standing before a collection of paintings by local artists who had never achieved fame or fortune. She was alone except for the elderly gallery owner, discussing the technical aspects of a landscape that most people would have dismissed as amateur. "The brushwork in the sky shows real understanding of light," Nicole was saying, her voice filled with the same intensity he had heard at the auction. "Look how the artist captured the way clouds filter sunlight differently, depending on their thickness. This isn't the work of someone copying techniques. This is someone who spent hours observing nature." Damian waited until their conversation ended before approaching. "You're right about the light," he said quietly. "You know, I've been studying art for the past few weeks, trying to understand what you see in these pieces." Nicole turned, surprised to find him there. "Mr. Wesley, I didn't expect to see you in a place like this." "Damian," he corrected, "and I've been learning that the most valuable things aren't always in the most obvious places." For the first time, she looked at him with something other than suspicion. "What do you want from me?" The question was direct, challenging, and Damian found himself giving an equally direct answer. "I want to understand how you see the world. I want to know what makes someone dedicate their life to preserving beauty that most people ignore. I want." He paused, struggling to articulate feelings he had buried for years. "I want to know what it feels like to care about something more than profit margins and quarterly reports." That same night, as if fate had decided to intervene, Nicole's car broke down in a sudden rainstorm outside the gallery. Damian appeared like Providence, offering her shelter in his car while they waited for the storm to pass. Trapped together by the downpour, they found themselves talking for hours about everything except money and business. "Why do you do this?" Damian asked, gesturing toward the small gallery barely visible through the rain-streaked windows. "You could work for major museums, make real money, have security." Nicole was quiet for a long moment, watching the rain create patterns on the glass. "Because these artists matter," she said finally, her voice fierce with conviction. "Just because someone isn't famous doesn't mean their story doesn't deserve to be told. Just because a painting doesn't hang in the Museum of Fine Arts doesn't mean it can't change someone's life." In that moment, Damian realized he had found something he had never encountered in his corporate world, someone who valued purpose over profit, who measured success not in dollars, but in meaning. The revelation was both thrilling and terrifying, because it meant everything he thought he knew about relationships was wrong. That night in the rain-soaked car marked the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Nicole's walls, built from years of disappointment and her father's abandonment, began to crack as Damian proved himself through actions rather than the acquisitions that defined his business world. He didn't send expensive flowers to her gallery instead. He showed up with coffee and sandwiches during her long restoration sessions, sitting quietly while she worked, asking thoughtful questions about technique and history. When she mentioned struggling to afford proper lighting for a delicate 18th-century portrait, he didn't write a check. Instead, he spent his weekend researching conservation lighting, learning about UV protection and color temperature, then helped her install a system that would preserve the painting for future generations. The transformation was gradual but profound. Damian found himself scaling back his empire's demands, delegating meetings to spend mornings discussing art history over breakfast. He learned that Nicole's passion wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Each forgotten artist she championed was a stand-in for every overlooked person who had ever been dismissed as worthless. Nicole, meanwhile, discovered that the man behind the billionaire facade was nothing like the collectors who had disappointed her before. When she shared her dreams of opening a gallery for emerging artists, he listened without immediately offering to finance it. When she talked about her father's abandonment, he didn't try to fix her pain with grand gestures, simply held her hand and let her feel heard. Trust, they both learned, wasn't built through transactions but through consistency. Not through what Damian could buy, but through who he chose to become when no one was watching except the woman whose opinion had begun to matter more than any board of directors. 2 years after that rain-soaked night in the car, Nicole and Damian stood in the same small Jamaica Plain gallery, where their love had truly begun. The space had been transformed for their wedding, not with expensive decorations or elaborate arrangements, but with the artwork that had brought them together. Paintings lined the walls like silent witnesses to their journey, each piece telling its own story of love, loss, and redemption. Nicole wore her grandmother's simple cream-colored dress, the same one her grandmother had worn during the Great Depression when money was scarce but love was abundant. The dress had yellowed slightly with age, and the lace needed delicate handling, but it carried decades of family history in its threads. She had never felt more beautiful, more herself than in that moment. Damian, standing at the makeshift altar, surrounded by forgotten masterpieces, had never felt richer. Not because of the billions in his bank accounts or the empire he had built, but because of the woman walking toward him with tears of joy streaming down her face. For the first time in his adult life, his wealth felt irrelevant. What mattered was the way Nicole looked at him, not as a conquest or a financial opportunity, but as a man worthy of her love. The gallery owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Joy, who had become like a second mother to Nicole, officiated the ceremony. Her voice carried the weight of decades spent nurturing artists and believing in the power of beauty to transform lives. "Love," she said, addressing the small gathering of friends and family, "is like art. It requires patience, dedication, and the courage to see beauty where others see only rough edges." When the time came for vows, Nicole's voice was steady despite her tears. "Damian, you taught me that not all walls are meant to keep people out sometimes. They're just waiting for the right person to find the door. You found mine when I thought it was sealed forever. You showed me that love doesn't have to be a risk, it can be a safe harbor." Damian's response came from a place deeper than words usually reached. "Nicole, you showed me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought, only earned through love. You taught me that wealth means nothing if you have no one to share it with, and that the richest man is the one who wakes up every morning grateful for the person sleeping beside him." They bought a Brooklyn brownstone, not because it was prestigious or impressive, but because it felt like home the moment they walked through the front door. The house had good bones and large windows that let in natural light, perfect for displaying the growing collection of artwork that Nicole continued to rescue from obscurity. They filled the rooms with paintings and sculptures, with books and dreams, with the quiet contentment of two people who had found their perfect match. Damian surprised everyone, including himself, by scaling back his business empire. Meetings that had once seemed crucial were delegated to capable subordinates. The man who had once lived and breathed quarterly reports began spending his mornings in bed with Nicole, discussing the stories behind the paintings that adorned their walls. He learned about brushstrokes and color theory, about the way light could transform a simple landscape into something transcendent. Their life together became a masterpiece of small moments. Sunday mornings at farmers' markets, where Damian discovered the simple pleasure of choosing fresh vegetables for dinner. Evenings spent restoring paintings in Nicole's home studio, where she taught him to see beauty in imperfection. quiet conversations over coffee about which museums they would visit together, what countries they would explore, how they would fill their days with art and love and discovery. Nicole's gallery began to thrive with Damian's quiet support, not financial backing, but the confidence that came from having someone believe in her vision completely. She organized exhibitions featuring local artists, created programs that brought art education to underserved communities, and slowly built a reputation as someone who could spot talent before the rest of the world noticed. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March, Nicole discovered she was pregnant. The moment she saw the positive test, happiness flooded through her so intensely it felt dangerous. She had learned early in life that good things were fragile, that joy could be snatched away without warning. But as she sat on the bathroom floor of their brownstone, holding the test with trembling hands, she allowed herself to believe that this time would be different. When she told Damian, his reaction was everything she had hoped for and more. He didn't immediately start planning nurseries or calculating college funds. Instead, he pulled her into his arms and whispered, "We're going to have a family," as if he couldn't quite believe the miracle of it. They spent evenings planning their child's future with the same care Nicole used to plan art exhibitions. They debated which museums to visit first, the Children's Museum for hands-on exploration, or the Museum of Fine Arts to expose their baby to classical beauty. They talked about what stories they would tell, what values they would pass down, how they would raise a child who would see wonder in the world around them. Damian began talking to Nicole's growing belly during quiet moments, his voice soft with wonder. He would tell their unborn son about board meetings and quarterly reports, describing the absurdity of his business world in terms that made Nicole laugh. "Your daddy used to think money was the most important thing," he would say, his hand resting on her stomach. "But then your mommy taught him that love is the only currency that really matters." By 6 months, Nicole was glowing with the kind of happiness that seemed to emanate from every pore. Her gallery was thriving with a powerful exhibition about new life and hope, featuring artists who had overcome tremendous obstacles to create beauty. Damian had never seen her more radiant, more completely herself. Their brownstone filled with baby clothes and picture books, with dreams of tiny feet running through halls lined with artwork. They painted the nursery a soft yellow, choosing gender-neutral colors, because they cared more about creating a space filled with love than conforming to traditional expectations. Everything was perfect. Their love was strong, their future was bright, their child was healthy and growing. They had built something beautiful together, not just a relationship, but a life that honored both their dreams and their shared values. It was, Nicole would later reflect, the kind of perfection that should have warned them that fate was preparing to test everything they held dear. The contractions started on a Thursday morning, while Nicole was hanging paintings for her latest exhibition. At first, she dismissed them as the usual discomfort of pregnancy, but when she doubled over in pain while adjusting a landscape painting, she knew something was terribly wrong. She was only 27 weeks along, far too early for their son to survive safely in the world. Damian raced from his office to meet the ambulance at Boston Medical Center, his usual composure shattered by the paramedic's grim expression. By the time he reached the hospital, Nicole was already in labor, her face pale with terror and determination. "It's too early," she kept whispering, gripping his hand with desperate strength. "He's not ready. We haven't finished the nursery. We haven't bought enough books." David Wesley arrived at 2:47 a.m. on Friday, weighing barely 2 pounds and looking impossibly fragile under the harsh fluorescent lights of the delivery room. He was so small that Damian's wedding ring could have slipped over his tiny wrist, so delicate that every breath seemed like a miracle and a struggle simultaneously. The NICU team whisked him away before Nicole could hold him, leaving both parents staring at empty arms and wondering how something so wanted could feel so frightening. The neonatal intensive care unit became their world for the next 3 days. The space hummed with machines that breathed for babies too small to manage on their own, monitored heartbeats too weak to sustain life without help. Nicole and Damian took turns sitting beside David's incubator, their hands resting on the clear plastic that separated them from their son. They spoke to him in whispers, sharing dreams they had been saving for bedtime stories. Nicole told him about the paintings they would see together, the way Monet captured light on water, how Van Gogh painted his emotions in swirling colors, the quiet beauty of portraits that revealed the soul behind the face. Damian described the places they would travel: museums in Paris, galleries in Florence, the small studios where unknown artists created beauty that only a few people would ever appreciate. "We're going to show you everything," Nicole promised, her finger tracing the outline of David's hand through the plastic. "Every beautiful thing in this world, we'll share it with you. You're going to love art as much as your mama does, and maybe you'll teach your daddy to see even more beauty than he already has." Damian added his own promises, his voice thick with hope and fear. "You're going to be so smart, little man, smarter than both of us. You'll probably end up teaching us things we never knew about love, about what really matters. We're going to give you so much love that you'll never doubt how wanted you are." On Sunday evening, as the sun was setting over Boston Harbor, David's heart monitor began to sound an alarm that would haunt Nicole's dreams for years to come. The steady beeping that had become the soundtrack to their vigil suddenly became erratic, then frantic, then silence. Nicole was holding his tiny hand when his breath became stillness, when the machines confirmed what her heart already knew. "I love you," she whispered, the words barely audible over her own sobs. "Mama loves you so much. Daddy loves you so much. We will always, always love you." Those were the last words David would ever hear, carried on his mother's voice into whatever comes after life ends too soon. The funeral was held on a Wednesday at a small cemetery in Cambridge, where tiny graves told stories of dreams that ended before they could begin. Nicole stood beside the impossibly small casket, wearing the same black dress she had worn to the charity auction where she met Damian. It seemed like a lifetime ago that she had spoken about love choosing to stay when everything falls apart. "He was supposed to see the world with us," Nicole said, her voice hollow with grief. The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water, carrying the weight of every plan they had made, every dream they had shared. Damian, his own heart shattered beyond recognition, tried to find meaning in the meaningless. "He'll see it through us," he replied, though he wasn't sure he believed his own words. "Every museum we visit, every painting we look at, he'll be there. We'll carry him with us." But grief, they discovered, had its own logic, its own cruel mathematics of blame and guilt. In the weeks that followed David's death, Nicole found herself replaying every moment of her pregnancy with the obsessive precision of someone searching for the exact moment everything went wrong. Had she worked too many late nights at the gallery? Had the stress of the exhibition been too much? Had she been selfish, prioritizing her career over her unborn child's needs? She remembered lifting heavy frames, staying on her feet for hours while installing shows, pushing herself to meet deadlines when perhaps she should have been resting. The questions consumed her, eating away at sleep and appetite and hope. She would lie awake at night, constructing elaborate theories about how her choices had killed her son. If only she had been more careful, more protective, more focused on being a mother instead of a curator. If only she had listened to her body, rested more, worried less about her artists, and more about the tiny life growing inside her. Damian, drowning in his own helplessness and desperate to make sense of their loss, said the words that would haunt their marriage forever. They were sitting in their kitchen, surrounded by sympathy cards and untouched casseroles from friends who didn't know what else to offer, when his own grief twisted into something darker. "Maybe if you hadn't been so obsessed with that exhibition," he said, his voice quiet but cutting. "Maybe if you'd taken better care of yourself, put the baby first instead of those paintings." The accusation hung between them like poison gas, invisible but deadly. Nicole stared at her husband, the man who had promised to love her through anything, and watched her grief transform into something harder, colder. The blame she had been directing at herself suddenly had a voice, and it belonged to the person she had trusted most in the world. "You think this is my fault?" The question came out barely above a whisper, but it carried the force of everything breaking inside her. Damian, too lost in his own pain to recognize the damage he was causing, doubled down on his cruelty. "I think we both need to face reality about what happened. I think we need to be honest about the choices that led us here." Nicole fled to her gallery that night, carrying her husband's blame, like another weight on shoulders already bowed by grief. She wandered through the quiet space, surrounded by the art she had supposedly loved more than her unborn child, and wondered if Damian was right. Had her ambition killed their son? 3 weeks later, the medical report arrived at the gallery office where Nicole had been essentially living, unable to bear the thought of returning to the brownstone full of baby clothes and shattered dreams. Her hands shook as she read the clinical language that spelled out the truth in cold, precise terms. The cause of the premature labor had been complications related to an untreated chlamydia infection that had caused premature rupture of membranes. The infection had been transmitted from the father's previous exposure. Not work stress, not late nights at the gallery, not a mother who cared too much about art and too little about her pregnancy. Damian, the infection had come from Damian. When she confronted him that evening, medical report clutched in her trembling hands. His face went completely white. She watched as recognition and horror dawned in his eyes, as memory returned like a punch to the gut. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice carried no conviction. "I was tested before we—" He stopped, his memory suddenly flooding back to years before he had met Nicole. To the reckless nights and nameless encounters of his younger self, to infections he had ignored or treated carelessly because he was too proud or too busy building his empire to follow through properly. "I forgot," he whispered, the words barely audible. "Jesus, Nicole, I completely forgot. That was so long ago, before I met you. Before I became the person you made me want to be." Nicole stared at him with a mixture of rage and disbelief that made his blood freeze. The woman who had loved him completely, who had trusted him with her heart and her body and her dreams, was looking at him like he was a stranger. "You forgot that you had an infection that could kill our child?" Her voice was deadly quiet now, more terrifying than if she had screamed. "It was years ago. I thought it was treated. I never would have." "You let me blame myself." The words exploded from her with all the force of weeks of self-torture. "For weeks, I've been tearing myself apart, thinking I killed our son with my work, my ambition, my selfishness. And you let me. You encouraged it. You blamed me." Damian reached for her, but she jerked away like his touch was toxic. "Nicole, please, I didn't remember." "Get away from me!" The scream echoed through their brownstone, bouncing off walls that had once held so much love and now contained only the wreckage of everything they had built together. In the weeks that followed the revelation, their brownstone became a mausoleum of destroyed dreams. The morning conversations over coffee stopped. The gentle touches that had once punctuated their days disappeared. Nicole couldn't look at Damian without seeing David's tiny face, without remembering the weeks she had spent drowning in self-blame, while the man who had promised to protect her watched her torture herself and even blamed her. Every room in their home held memories that now felt poisoned. The kitchen where they had planned their son's future was now a place of tense silence. The living room where Damian had talked to her belly was now a space they navigated around each other like strangers. The nursery, that bright yellow room filled with hope, remained untouched, its door closed like a wound that refused to heal. Nicole found herself unable to bear Damian's presence for more than a few minutes at a time. When he tried to approach her, to explain or apologize, or simply exist in the same space, she would feel her chest tighten with a rage so pure it frightened her. This wasn't just about his forgotten infection. It was about the double betrayal of hiding something that killed their child and then allowing her to believe she was responsible. "I can't do this," she told him one evening, standing in the doorway of their bedroom, while he sat on the edge of the bed they had once shared so intimately. "I can't look at you without seeing him. I can't touch you without remembering that your body carried the thing that killed our baby." Damian's face crumpled with pain, but Nicole felt no sympathy. Her capacity for forgiveness had been burned away by weeks of unnecessary guilt, by the memory of his accusatory words when she had needed his support most. "I loved him too," Damian said, his voice breaking. "I wanted him just as much as you did. This is killing me too, Nicole. I can't live with what I've done." "Then don't," Nicole replied, the words coming out colder than she had intended. "But don't expect me to help you carry guilt that should have been yours from the beginning." In the days that followed, Damian began drinking, with the systematic determination of a man trying to drown voices that wouldn't be silenced. He would leave for his office in the morning appearing normal, but return home reeking of whiskey and regret. His business decisions became increasingly reckless, as if he was trying to destroy the empire he had built as penance for destroying his family. Board meetings became exercises in barely controlled chaos. The man who had once been known for his sharp mind and calculated risks began making investments that his advisors couldn't understand, approving deals that seemed designed to lose money rather than make it. When his senior partners expressed concern, he would dismiss them with a coldness that left everyone walking on eggshells. Nicole watched his self-destruction with a detachment that would have horrified her former self. The woman who had once loved him completely now felt nothing but exhaustion when she looked at the man stumbling through their home like a ghost haunting his own life. She had no energy left for his pain. Her own grief filled every available space in her heart. Their conversations, when they happened at all, became exercises in calculated cruelty. Both of them found the exact words that would cause the most damage, as if inflicting pain on each other could somehow balance the pain of losing David. "I would have understood if you'd told me from the beginning," Nicole said during one of their late-night encounters in the kitchen, when Damian came home to find her sitting at the table with untouched tea. "If you had been honest about your past, about the risks, we could have been careful. We could have gotten treatment, taken precautions, prepared properly." Damian slumped into the chair across from her, his face haggard from alcohol and sleepless nights. "I didn't know, Nicole. I swear to God, I didn't remember. That part of my life, those years before I met you, they feel like they happened to someone else." Nicole's laugh was bitter and hollow. "That's exactly the problem, isn't it? Your past was so full of meaningless encounters that you forgot one that would kill our son. You were so busy collecting women like you collect properties that you couldn't be bothered to remember which ones might have consequences." The words hit their target with precision. Damian flinched as if she had struck him physically, but Nicole felt no satisfaction in his pain. There was no relief in hurting him, no sense of justice servantly, the empty echo of two people destroying each other because they couldn't destroy the thing that had actually taken their child. After 2 months of this toxic dance, Nicole packed a single suitcase and moved into the small apartment above her gallery. The space was cramped and barely furnished, but it felt like sanctuary compared to the emotional battlefield their home had become. For the first time since David's death, she could breathe without feeling like she was suffocating on her own rage. The physical separation seemed to create an emotional chasm that widened with each passing day. When Damian tried to call, Nicole let it go to voicemail. When he showed up at the gallery, she had her assistant tell him she was busy. His touch, which had once been her greatest comfort, now felt like betrayal made flesh. They lived separate lives in the same city, moving through different worlds that occasionally intersected in painful, accidental encounters. Nicole would see him getting out of his car near the financial district, looking thinner and more hollow each time. He would catch glimpses of her through the gallery windows, working late into the night with the desperate focus of someone trying to outrun her own thoughts. Nicole's gallery began to gain international recognition, but not for the reasons she had once dreamed. Her exhibitions about loss, betrayal, and survival struck a chord with critics and visitors who recognized authentic pain when they saw it. Art dealers from New York and Los Angeles began making inquiries about her artists, drawn by the raw, emotional honesty that permeated every show. Meanwhile, Damian's business also reached unprecedented levels of success, but it felt meaningless without someone to share it with. He would sit in his penthouse office, looking out at the harbor where he had once seen possibility, and feel nothing but the vast emptiness of a life built on achievements that no longer mattered. 2 years passed in this strange parallel existence. Nicole's grief gradually transformed into something harder but more manageable, a scar instead of an open wound. She threw herself into her work with renewed purpose, creating exhibitions that helped other people process their own losses. Her artists began to achieve recognition, their forgotten voices finally finding audiences who understood their worth. Damian's empire continued to grow too, but his personal life remained a wasteland of alcohol and regret. He moved through his days like an automaton, going through the motions of success while feeling dead inside. The brownstone sat empty, except for his occasional drunken visits to David's untouched nursery, where he would sit on the floor and apologize to the silence. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered to Damian's office by a process server who seemed uncomfortable with the task. Nicole was requesting nothing: no alimony, no share of his assets, no claim to the properties they had acquired together. She wanted only her freedom, the legal severing of ties that had already been emotionally cut. Damian signed the papers without reading the terms, his heart too shattered to care about money or possessions. What was the point of fighting for assets when he had already lost everything that mattered? The empire he had built felt like ashes in his mouth, meaningless without the woman who had taught him that wealth without love was just elaborate poverty. The man who had once been able to buy anything discovered that some things: forgiveness, trust, the chance to undo devastating mistakes, could not be purchased at any price. 3 years passed like seasons changing slowly, then all at once. Nicole had built a new life from the ashes of her old one, her gallery now internationally recognized for exhibitions that explored the deepest corners of human experience. Critics praised her ability to find artists who could transform pain into beauty, loss into meaning. What they didn't know was that she had become an expert at recognizing authentic suffering because she carried so much of her own. Damian's empire had expanded beyond his wildest early ambitions, stretching across the eastern seaboard, with developments that bore his name on bronze plaques. He moved through his business dealings with mechanical precision, making decisions that generated millions while feeling nothing. Success had become his prison, wealth his punishment for crimes that money could never absolve. But fate, it seemed, had its own sense of timing. The building acquisition should have been routine, a mid-century commercial property in Cambridge that Damian's company planned to convert into luxury condominiums. His team had handled the paperwork, the inspections, the zoning applications. It wasn't until he reviewed the final tenant list that he saw her name: Nicole Murphy, ground floor gallery lease, 2 years remaining. For several minutes, he sat in his office, staring at the document, his carefully controlled world suddenly tilting on its axis. She was there, in a building he now owned, continuing the work that had once brought them together. The irony was almost too much to bear. He could have evicted her easily: legal technicalities, development needs, any number of corporate justifications that would have forced her to relocate. His lawyers were already drafting the paperwork when he made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of forcing her out, he found himself walking past the building at odd hours, watching through the large windows as she worked. Nicole had changed in the years since their separation. She moved with a kind of focused intensity that spoke of hard-won resilience. Her face had lost some of its softness, replaced by the sharp beauty of someone who had survived the worst kind of loss. She worked late into the evening, often alone, surrounded by paintings that seemed to pulse with emotional weight. Sometimes he would see her pause in her work, her hand resting on her stomach in a gesture that broke his heart, because he remembered when that gesture had meant hope instead of grief. She looked fragile but fierce, like a warrior who had learned to fight battles that couldn't be won with conventional weapons. The power outage happened on a Thursday evening in October, when an early snowstorm knocked out electricity across 3 city blocks. Damian had been leaving his office when the building's systems failed, trapping him in the elevator between the 4th and 5th floors. What he didn't know as he aimlessly scrolled through Instagram while virtually instructing his assistant was that Nicole had been in the same elevator. Heading to the parking garage after a late evening installing her newest exhibition his company bought. Though he didn't notice her, she recognized him, but expected it would be a quick ride and she'd be out before he even noticed her. But now, the emergency lighting cast everything in strange shadows as they found themselves face to face for the first time in 3 years. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with everything they had said and everything they had left unsaid. "Nicole," he said, finally looking up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Damian." She pressed herself against the far wall of the elevator, as if distance could protect her from the emotions that seeing him unleashed. They waited in tense silence for rescue that seemed increasingly unlikely to arrive quickly. The storm outside was worsening, and the building's emergency systems indicated it might be hours before power was restored. Trapped together in the small space, with nothing but darkness and honesty between them, they began to talk. The conversation started carefully, tentatively safe topics like the weather, the power outage, anything except the enormous grief that sat between them like a third presence in the elevator. But as hours passed and rescue failed to materialize, their defenses began to crumble. "I kept David's room exactly as it was," Damian admitted into the darkness, his voice thick with 3 years of suppressed emotion. "I couldn't change anything. I couldn't move his clothes or put away the mobile you bought. It's like a museum now, a shrine to everything I destroyed." Nicole was quiet for so long that he wondered if she had heard him. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of equal suffering. "I never went back to the brownstone after I moved out. I couldn't bear to see his room, to face what we had planned for him. I've been living above the gallery for 3 years because I can't handle being in spaces that remember him. Besides, I might lose the gallery soon." In the darkness, they found themselves sharing things they had never been able to say when they could see each other's faces. They talked about David, really talked about him for the first time since his death. They shared memories of those brief 3 days, the promises they had whispered, the dreams they had built around a future that lasted less than a week. "I talk to him sometimes," Nicole confessed. "When I'm alone in the gallery, working late, I tell him about the artists, about the paintings. I describe colors to him, the way light changes throughout the day. I know it's probably crazy, but—" "It's not crazy," Damian interrupted. "I do the same thing. When I'm in his room, I tell him about my day, about the buildings I'm constructing. I tell him I'm sorry, over and over, until the words don't mean anything anymore." Something shifted in the elevator during those hours, not forgiveness, exactly, but a recognition of shared grief that had been processed in isolation for too long. They were both broken, but their brokenness matched in ways that no one else could understand. When the power finally returned and the elevator doors opened, they stood there for a moment, blinking in the sudden light, neither wanting to end the first honest conversation they had shared in years. "Nicole," Damian said as she stepped out of the elevator, "don't move the gallery, please. I own the building now, and don't want you to leave." She turned back to look at him, her expression unreadable. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I own the gallery now. I needed to evict you and renovate the buildings, but instead of evicting you, I want to make you an offer. Not a business proposition, not a legal arrangement. Something else entirely." Over the next week, they met twice, once at a neutral coffee shop, once in Nicole's gallery after hours. The conversations were careful, tentative, like two people trying to navigate around a bomb that might explode if they stepped wrong. But gradually, an idea emerged that neither of them could have anticipated. "One night," Nicole said finally, during their second meeting. "One final night to properly say goodbye to our marriage, to David, to everything we were before it all fell apart." "One night," Damian agreed, though his heart was already hoping for something more than goodbye. No lawyers, no paperwork, no expectations beyond closure. Just the two of us, trying to remember what we had before we lost everything. Nicole continued, her voice gaining strength. "Before the blame and the anger and the guilt turned us into people we didn't recognize. They decided to meet at the brownstone, the house that had held their greatest joy and deepest sorrow, the place where David's presence still lingered in every carefully preserved detail." When Nicole walked through the front door for the first time in 3 years, she nearly collapsed from the emotional impact. Everything was exactly as she had left, either coffee cup still on the kitchen counter, her book still open on the bedside table, her paintings still covering the walls with their quiet beauty. "You kept everything," she whispered, running her fingers along surfaces that felt familiar and foreign simultaneously. "I couldn't change anything," Damian replied. "Changing it would have meant accepting that you were really gone, and too wasn't ready for that level of reality." They made their way slowly through the house, reacquainting themselves with spaces that had once been filled with love and laughter. But it was David's nursery that broke them both completely. The yellow walls, the carefully chosen mobile, the tiny clothes still folded in the dresser, it was all exactly as they had left it, a perfect preserve of hope frozen in time. Nicole sank to the floor beside the crib, her composure finally cracking. "I ran because staying meant facing what you'd done to us every day," she said through tears that had been held back for 3 years. "I couldn't look at you without seeing him, without remembering that your past had killed our future." Damian knelt beside her, close enough to touch, but not quite touching. "I stayed because leaving felt like abandoning him, like admitting that his death was meaningless. But I also stayed because I knew I deserved to suffer, to live every day with the knowledge of what my carelessness had cost us." For the first time since David's death, they grieved together properly. They sorted through his impossibly tiny clothes, sharing memories of the brief time they had spent as his parents. They talked about how differently they had processed the lost Nicole's need to flee from reminders, Damian's compulsion to preserve everything exactly as it had been. "We both loved him so much," Nicole said, holding a onesie that David had never lived long enough to wear. "But we loved him in different ways, and we grieved him in different ways, and somehow that made us strangers to each other when we needed each other most." "I failed you," Damian said simply. "I failed you both, and I don't know how to keep living with that knowledge." Nicole looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. She saw the guilt that had eaten away at him, the way grief had carved new lines around his eyes, the genuine remorse that had replaced his earlier defensiveness. "We both failed," she said quietly. "We failed David, we failed each other, and we failed ourselves." That night in David's nursery, surrounded by the artifacts of their shattered dreams, something fundamental shifted between Nicole and Damian. The anger that had sustained Nicole for 3 years began to transform into something softer but no less profound. The guilt that had consumed Damian started to evolve from self-destruction into a desire for redemption that felt, for the first time, achievable. They moved from the nursery to their old bedroom, the space where they had once planned their future and whispered their hopes into the darkness. The bed looked exactly as Nicole had left its sheets, still rumpled from her last night there, her pillow still holding the faint impression of her head. "I used to sleep on your side," Damian admitted, his voice barely audible. "I could still smell your shampoo on the pillowcase for weeks after you left. When that faded, I thought I might lose my mind completely." Nicole sat on the edge of the bed, running her hands over fabric that felt like memory made tangible. "You know, I haven't slept well since I left here. The apartment above the gallery is too quiet, too empty. I kept expecting to hear you breathing beside me, and when the silence reminded me, You weren't there. I would remember why. When Damian finally pulled her into a kiss, it was unlike anything they had experienced before, not the passionate discovery of new love or the comfortable intimacy of married life, but something deeper and more desperate. 5 years of suppressed longing poured out in whispered apologies and gentle touches that carried the weight of everything they had lost and everything they might still save. That night, they made love without the shadow of secrets between them, without the fear that hidden truths might surface to destroy what they were building. For the first time since David's death, their physical connection felt clean, honest, free from the poison of betrayal and blame that had contaminated their marriage. "I never stopped loving you," Nicole whispered against his chest as they lay together afterward, her tears mixing with his in the darkness. "Even when I hated you, even when I couldn't bear to look at you, some part of me never stopped loving the man who taught me that walls could be doors." "I never stopped hoping you'd come home," Damian replied, his hands threading through her hair with the reverence of someone handling something precious and fragile. "Every day for 3 years, I hoped you'd walk through that door and tell me we could find a way back to each other." But healing, they discovered, wasn't about erasing the past or pretending their pain had been insignificant. It was about learning to integrate their suffering into something that could coexist with love, about building something new from the foundation of everything that had broken. They spent the following weeks carefully rebuilding connection, not the relationship they had before, but something entirely different. They met for coffee, took long walks through Boston Common, visited museums where they could stand before paintings and remember why art had brought them together in the first place. Nicole began staying at the brownstone occasionally, then more frequently than most nights. They moved around each other carefully, like dancers learning new choreography, conscious that one wrong step could send them back to the isolation they had barely survived. 3 months after their night of grieving and reconnection, Nicole discovered she was pregnant again. The panic that seized her was immediate and overwhelming. She sat on the bathroom floor of the gallery apartment, staring at the positive test, and felt terror instead of joy. Her first instinct was to handle this alone, to protect herself from the possibility of watching another child die while Damian watched helplessly. She made an appointment with her doctor, researched options, and began preparing herself for a pregnancy that she would navigate without the complications of a relationship that had already proven itself capable of devastating betrayal. But Damian, who had learned to read her moods with the precision of someone who had lost her once and refused to lose her again, noticed the changes. The exhaustion that she tried to hide, the way she touched her stomach unconsciously, the tears that seemed to come from nowhere when she thought no one was watching, recognized the signs because he had lived through them before. When he confronted her at the gallery on a Thursday evening, finding her sitting among paintings that depicted mothers and children with expressions of fierce protectiveness, she broke down completely. "I can't do this again," she sobbed, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. "I can't watch another child die because of something we don't know about each other. I can't trust that we've told each other everything, that there aren't other secrets waiting to destroy us." Damian knelt beside her chair, his own heart breaking at the fear in her voice. "Nicole, look at me, please." When she finally met his eyes, he saw terror and hope warring in her expression, love and distrust existing side by side in a way that made his chest ache. "No secrets," he said, his voice carrying the weight of every promise he had ever broken and every vow he intended to keep. "No hiding, no assumptions, no hoping that problems will resolve themselves. We do this together this time, or we don't do it at all." "What if something goes wrong again?" Nicole asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if we lose this baby too? What if I can't handle losing another child, losing you again, losing everything we're trying to rebuild?" "Then we'll face it together," Damian replied. "We'll hold each other through whatever comes, and we won't let fear or blame tear us apart again." "But Nicole," he took her hands in his, feeling the trembling that spoke of terror and hope in equal measure. We can't let the possibility of loss prevent us from the possibility of love. The pregnancy that followed was a careful dance of hope and terror, of celebration tempered by caution. They attended every appointment together, submitting to comprehensive genetic testing and screening that left no question unasked, no possibility unexplored. When other couples might have been designing nurseries and choosing names, Nicole and Damian were mapping out contingency plans and preparing themselves for every conceivable outcome. But slowly, as weeks turned into months and each milestone passed without crisis, they began to allow themselves small moments of joy. Damian would talk to Nicole's growing belly about the paintings they would show their child, the museums they would visit, the world of beauty they would explore together. Nicole would read bedtime stories to her unborn child, sharing tales of brave princes, princesses, and magical kingdoms where love conquered every obstacle. They celebrated each doctor's appointment like a victory, each clean test result like a miracle. When they learned they were having a daughter, they wept together not from grief this time, but from the overwhelming possibility that they might actually get to keep this child, raise her, watch her grow into whoever she was meant to become. The birth happened on a Tuesday morning in spring, when Boston was coming alive with cherry blossoms and the promise of renewal. Unlike David's terrifying early arrival, their daughter came exactly when she was supposed to, healthy and strong and absolutely perfect. Damian held her first, his hands shaking with emotion as he looked into eyes that seemed to hold infinite possibility. "Hello, beautiful girl," he whispered, his voice thick with tears. "We've been waiting for you for so long." Nicole watched from the hospital bed, her heart full of joy and residual fear, love and terror existing side by side in a way that felt familiar but manageable. When Damian placed their daughter in her arms, she felt complete for the first time since David's death. "Your brother would have loved you so much," Nicole whispered, touching her daughter's perfect little fingers. "He would have taught you about art and beauty and how to see wonder in everything around you. He'll always be part of our family, even though he couldn't stay with us." They named her Hope not because they had forgotten their grief, but because they had learned that love and loss could coexist, that healing didn't require forgetting, and that second chances were possible for people willing to do the hard work of rebuilding trust from the ground up. As Nicole nursed their daughter in the quiet hospital room, Damian sitting beside them with his hand resting gently on her shoulder, they both understood that they had been given something precious and fragile, not just a healthy child, but the possibility of a love that could survive the worst things life could throw at it. 2 years after Hope's birth, Nicole and Damian stood once again in a gallery surrounded by art. But this time the painting spoke of survival and second chances rather than loss and separation. They had chosen to remarry, in Nicole's gallery, the same space where she had built her new life from the ashes of their old one, where broken artists had found their voices again through her belief in their worth. The ceremony was small, intimate, attended only by people who had witnessed their journey through darkness and back into light. Hope toddled between the easels in a white dress that made her look like a tiny angel, her laughter echoing off walls that had absorbed years of tears and healing. Mrs. Joy, now in her 80s but still sharp as the day she had married them the first time, officiated again. Her voice carried the wisdom of someone who had seen love in all its forms, young and passionate, mature and tested, broken and rebuilt. "Marriage isn't a destination," she told the small gathering. "It's a daily choice to keep building something beautiful together, even when the foundation cracks, even when you have to rebuild from the ground up." When the time came for new vows, Nicole's voice was steady and sure, carrying the weight of everything they had survived. "Love isn't about perfect moments," she said, her eyes locked on Damian's face. "It's about choosing each other through broken ones, even when trust has to be rebuilt piece by piece. It's about deciding that the work of forgiveness is worth the possibility of forever." Damian's response came from a place deeper than his first wedding vows, tempered by loss and strengthened by the knowledge of what love actually cost. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's deciding that love is stronger than the worst things we've done. It's choosing to believe in the possibility of redemption, in the power of two people to create something beautiful from the wreckage of their mistakes. They moved back into the brownstone, but it was different now, not a museum of grief, but a living home filled with hopes, toys, and laughter. They had converted one of the spare rooms into a play area where their daughter could create her own masterpieces with finger paints and crayons. Her artistic attempts displayed with the same reverence they showed for Renaissance masters. The garden behind the house became Hope's kingdom, a place where she chased butterflies and collected flowers that she would bring to her parents with the proud determination of someone who had discovered beauty. On warm afternoons, Nicole and Damian would sit on the back porch, watching their daughter explore the world with the fearless curiosity of a child who had never known anything but love. We had to lose everything to understand what forgiveness really costs. Nicole reflected one evening as they watched Hope carefully examining a ladybug that had landed on her finger. We had to break completely before we could learn how to rebuild something stronger. Damian nodded, his arm around Nicole's shoulders, their daughter's delighted squeals filling the air around them. "I never planned on letting you go that night we said goodbye in David's room," he admitted. "One night was supposed to become forever, but I was too afraid to hope for it." Nicole leaned into his warmth, feeling the solid reality of their rebuilt life. Some love stories have to shatter completely before they can be rebuilt into something stronger. We couldn't appreciate what we had until we learned what it meant to lose it. Hope's laughter rang out across the garden as she discovered a butterfly resting on a rose bush. Her joy so pure and uncomplicated that it served as a daily reminder that love could create impossible beauty from the most devastating pain. Their story had become proof that the deepest love sometimes required surviving the worst betrayals, that second chances were earned through the hardest currency of all: truth, time, and the conscious choice to love despite having every reason not to. They had learned that forgiveness wasn't weakness, but strength, that healing didn't require forgetting, but rather the courage to transform pain into wisdom. As the sun set over their garden and Hope ran toward them with grass-stained knees and flower petals in her hair, Nicole and Damian knew they had finally found their way home, not to the place they had started, but to something entirely new, built on the foundation of everything they had lost and everything they had chosen to rebuild together. My dear family, Nicole and Damian's story reminds us that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing harmful actions. It's about choosing to believe in the possibility of transformation. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are also the ones who can teach us the most about our own capacity for grace. Their love didn't survive because it was perfect, it survived because they were willing to do the hardest work of rebuilding trust, brick by brick, choice by choice. Thank you for trusting me with your time tonight. Your support means everything to me. If this story touched something in your heart, quickly hit that subscribe button. Like, comment the moment you felt most in this story, and please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, your own story of love, loss, and second chances matters too. Until next time, keep believing in the power of human resilience.